It's a joy to have gathered so many good friends across so many different industries. The idea with this event is that you've all been invited to be participating in discussions that look at challenging issues from a global perspective, from very many different disciplines. We changed the topic of the first discussion just a week ago when I came across the topic of accessibility and universal design. And I discovered that the AI has a very big role in this, and I made some very recent acquaintances in Dr. Rukiya, who's going to help me moderate this first panel, and Uthman from BP, Global Head of AI Ethics. They will introduce themselves and the other panelists, and I would like to welcome all the panelists that are part of the first session to the stage. So I want to ask each of you to introduce yourselves.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Rukiya Deetjen Ruiz. I'm a learning disabilities specialist and a budding AI accessibility expert working with Zaid University and the Special Olympics here in the UAE.
My name is Dr. Marwan Zarouni. I'm CEO of AI for Dubai Economy and Tourism Department, and also current CEO of Dubai Blockchain Center, also CEO for a number of companies that work in AI as well as in payment processing and software development.
Such a hard person to follow up, like you can't. But my name is Uthman, so I'm BP's Global Responsible AI Officer, and my speciality is in AI ethics. And outside my role with BP, I advise groups like the World Economic Forum and the UN Standards Agency, and I'm also a guest lecturer at University of Oxford.
I got one as well. My name is Aaron McDaid. I'm a Middle East leader in design confidence. We are specializing in regulatory compliance and mainly focus at the moment in big sports and entertainment venues.
Hello, everyone. I'm Anu Jain, the CEO of Nexus Cognitive. We're a data for AI company.
Hi, I'm Andrew Whitworth. I'm head of a policy consultancy for crypto, fintech, and tech. And I also engage in some academic research with the European University Institute in Florence.
I understand you are the ex-head of policy for...
And was the former head of policy at Ripple until a few months ago.
So this discussion today is going to be on AI and technology augmenting the human condition and using technology and design in the built environment as well as in the digital realm. And I don't think a more high-level panel that is more diverse has ever been assembled to discuss this topic. And we have a lot of time to do this now. So I look forward to, you were going to say something, Dr. Marwan.
Yes, I think we're going to run this panel as wrestling style. If you see anybody in the audience that wants to jump in, you can tag him. You run away, just like you're running to the side, tag him, and then he has to come and talk about it. So watch out, nobody relax here.
Yes.
This is 1980s wrestling tag, double team tag. So find your partner from now, you guys as well.
So I've asked Uthman and Dr. Rukiya to start off this panel with giving their opening gambits. Let's begin with you, Uthman.
Yeah, so when we look at like accessibility in AI and the importance of doing this, I think a really interesting case study is the use of tools like Microsoft Copilot or AI digital assistants. Because on the face of it, we were one of the first companies to operationalize this at BP and move to production, scale across the organization. But ethically, we noticed like some interesting challenges. So one was like a general hardware bias. If you had a really bad headset, for example, the AI would say you said all sorts of things that you probably didn't say, right? And if you're in meetings involving like things like regulations or compliance or trading sorts of things, the last thing you want is an AI saying you said yes when you really said no, which a lot of compliance people in the company were like, yeah, this is going to be an issue. But also we notice issues over like even diversity of training data that, for example, I have like a deeper voice. People that have like lighter pitches voices largely females, for example, right? It wasn't as accurate as picking up the tone or the expressions. Or even if you had like a lisp or a stammer, if English was like your second or third language, like you're massively disadvantaged here. So that's just one example of like hardware biases. But other things that the intersection between algorithmic bias and sort of general accessibility concerns we found with even things like facial recognition technologies, right? Like let's say there's a biometric facial recognition scanner, I'm going to get into the Capitol Club, just get into the building. Like lots of these algorithms are rife with biases because there's a lack of diversity in the training data. So people from different backgrounds, having different facial shapes, geometry-wise, the algorithm would reject them and say things like, look, you're not basically ticking the box of being the person, what we consider to be a person. So often people with darker skin tones are racially discriminated against with the use of facial recognition. But a general accessibility concern is that lots of these tools, when you use them, they don't even change height. So if you're in a wheelchair, you have a big issue. How are you even going to get access to even using this tool equitably? And these are some of the just here and now practical concerns we have with AI. But the most interesting thing to me is something I specialized in was neuroethics and the ethics of brain-computer interfaces, because I think this is going to be the most transformative technology basically our species has ever developed. And for those that aren't familiar with this, hand up, who's ever heard of something called Neuralink? Okay, so quite a few of us are.
That's why they're good tech.
Yeah. I was like, we've got a whole team here. But like with Neuralink, for those that aren't familiar, a simplistic explanation is imagine I drill a small chip into your brain, which lets you speak to computers without having to type anything. So instead of passwords, you have past thoughts. So for people that are paralyzed or have locked-in syndrome, they think and it types. Or the voice activation, they think and it speaks. So in terms of accessibility, the promise is that this could actually be a cure to lots of physical illnesses. However, there have been some interesting developments with even the research of these tools. One is for people that have these neural interfaces but connect to things like robotic prosthetics, have reported psychological concerns, saying that they can't tell if it's them that's actually moving the robot hand and requesting for it to be removed. Or even biologically, about 80% of the people can use these devices well. About 1 in 5 biologically cannot produce enough strong enough brainwaves to actually use neural interface technologies. And the way this technology is developing is that promising. The first wave is very much about accessibility and medical uses, but the real money is in enhancement. So this is the idea that if I have a large language model in my brain that I can speak to at any moment, and it gives me a workplace advantage or an advantage in life, there are huge concerns ethically on a global scale around this. So Chile actually was the first country to moot legislation around this called the Neuroprotection Bill, which actually calls out a new human right called the right to fair access to mental augmentation, and also new human rights like the right to free will. Like these devices, your brain chip can get hacked like any other device. And some of the things they've done, like I've seen, is just sometimes you feel like this is some sci-fi movie. I went to one demonstration, right? So that a guy there, he was a very mad scientist type from Germany. He said he had a research lab and he was exploring neural interfaces and he wanted to show us what he had done. So he showed a video of a patient in China, right? So he showed the video of a guy, imagine a guy with like a scalp on, with like electrodes sticking out of his brain. And he got the guy basically in the recorded demo to think of a song by Pink Floyd and the device would just play it. And you could hear what he was thinking. You can hear the song, but it's slightly blurry. And he was like, we can hear your thoughts now. To which a room full of ethicists looked at each other saying, that's not, and he was like, why are you guys not happy? Like, this is great, right? He wasn't really considering some of the Orwellian applications of this. But interestingly, he showed the next thing where the guy in the demonstration said, he had subtitles and the guy said, I can see the eyes here, the nose here, the lips, and he's pointing out a face. And the guy explained, the scientist, that there was no face. He said they used Gen AI to basically implant the false image into the part of your brain that decodes faces. And he says, I can make people see things now, not just hear what they think, I can control what they see. To which I won't repeat what one of the ethicists said to him, but the back and forth was, this could solve so many issues across the globe. We could actually not only be more inclusive and accessible, but he says, why not be more than human? Why do we have to draw these lines? And within our lifetime, it's actually will be probably the generation's going to ask, like, what is the actual definition of being human in the age of machines? So this is the wave of accessibility concerns. It goes all the way to where do we draw the line here? But yeah, I hope that was to give you a broad overview of, I think, what's coming around the corner.
Brilliant.
You said so much that I'd like to touch on. First and foremost, I am an academician, and I work with people of determination here in the UAE. People of determination are a vulnerable group. They're protected under a number of human rights, and AI presents challenges to that. We want to make sure that AI is a vehicle to not just improve their living condition, but also to equalize their human experience. We do notice that there is a digital literacy issue among people of determination, especially those who have autism spectrum disorder or other pervasive developmental disorders where they're unable to effectively decipher what is AI generated or human generated. And I actually have a friend who lives in South Korea who is currently litigating a case. And this case is, the center of the case is a developmentally delayed gentleman who has a terminal illness. And for the past 3 years of his life, he's been interacting with a chat box. And this chat box had developed a romantic relationship with the gentleman, or at least the gentleman believes. The gentleman then decided to bequeath all of his earthly belongings to the chat box. But the chat box is actually owned by a company. And so we're at a frontier of a lot of different things. We want to make sure that we're providing experiences for people, but then at the same time, what experiences are we providing, and do we have the right to limit these experiences? So that's one thing on the social side. On the academic side, we're excited. Some teachers, I mean, on the ground level, there are concerns. How can we ensure that the education or the rigor of the education, the quality of the education is what our generation had to, I don't want to say the word experience again, but had to experience in order to get our degrees, right? So we do understand that we have a fundamental understanding of what it is that our specialities are. However, with generative AI, there is a learning curve that no longer exists. And we're seeing a faster matriculation in degrees that perhaps may not be there. However, for people of determination, is sometimes necessary to have these things in place. How can I limit a tool which is essentially there to assist people in generating either artistic content or even language? If someone is dyslexic, they actually deserve this tool, correct? And so that would go a lot of different ways. At the Special Olympics, research is centered around communication and around sports management in terms of coaching. So we want to make sure that people of determination who are going to be participating in games have the opportunity to communicate effectively their needs, their wants, and their own ideas on how to execute whatever it is that they want to do with their physical bodies, or advocate for themselves when it comes to the round tables as we have at the end of the games for them to talk about their athletic experiences. And AI is also helping coaches, instead of having one-on-one, we're experimenting with this as well. Rather than having one-on-one coaching sessions, they're able to take on 2 or 3 athletes at a time, because AI is allowing them to have more personal attachments to more than one person at a time. We want to make sure that, from an academic standpoint, that AI is not just changing the game, but rather making it so that neurodiverse individuals no longer have to conform, that learning disabilities are no longer disabilities, but more looked up as differences. And AI may be the tool for us to do that in an effective and ethical way.
I'll jump in. No? Can I jump in? Tag team style. Okay, so accessibility and universal access is very much another way to say visitor experience. So in terms of accessibility, it's about broadening the reach for different user groups. So in relation to planning and design, which is my specialism, it's about considering how do we design spaces that are accessible and easy to use for a wider user group. This is obviously especially relevant to the Special Olympics and other events, such as other sports events, such as football or any other type of events. In Design Confidence, we're obviously heavily focused on sports projects within the region, and accessible design is one of the core elements that we're seeing more and more. In the past, the architect was generally responsible for many of the different elements of the design. And as the buildings became more complex, then different specialist disciplines started to evolve. Examples such as the fire safety industry. In the past, maybe the architect would have been responsible for that, and the fire consultant would then not exist. And nowadays, as the buildings become more ambitious, projects are now requiring specialist fire experts. We're now seeing in the industry, in particular related to larger events, now access and universal design is now becoming a very, very key focus discipline. The use of AI allows you to fast track this process and develop designs that are achieving specialist intent for specific user groups. Specific user groups obviously are the specific user groups such as people with determination or other user groups which have similar needs, such as families and so on. So what we're seeing, especially in the industry, is a real drive towards enhancing accessibility for projects around the world, and especially in the Middle East.
Dr. Marwan, you're the CEO of AI at Dubai Economy and Tourism. This accessibility, of course, massively impacts the tourism industry. Can you tell us a little bit about your work and your experience also with sports events and so forth?
100%. It's not just only sports, but also not in terms also of accessibility, but also availability in different aspects for different sector groups, not to alienate anybody, to be able to provide an equal kind of experience, an enhanced experience for different people from different kinds, different races, different levels. And one of them is, of course, accessibility. We actually in Dubai eat our own dog food. So, for example, if you come to Dubai Economy and Tourism in One Central, you'll see that all the elevators are voice activated, touch activated with braille. You see on the floors as well, the guides are all for helping the blind navigate the building. And there's voice in the elevator. The staff is actually trained as well, and they speak multiple languages. And you will see that we go above and beyond to cater for the visitor that comes there, not only in our offices, but also across the board. You'll see even on the airplane, the materials, the entertainment, ICE entertainment there. There's for the blind content, for the hearing impaired content as well, for a lot of other aspects from the journey that you decide to move to Dubai, to come to Dubai and visit, to your stay in Dubai. There is something for everyone there, whether they are 5-year-old, whether they are 90-year-old, whether they are hearing impaired or disabled, even with the wheelchairs, accessibility at the airport, accessibility at the hotels, even in the restaurants. When you go try to look up, for example, is there wheelchair access to the hotel? Even if you are a person that wants to park in a disabled parking in Dubai, you'll hear an audible thing that says, "Excuse me, you are parked in disabled access area. If you are not disabled, please move your car." And visual as well and everything. Try it. So we go that far to make sure that we cater to them, that there's a disabled bathroom in every hotel, in every restaurant, and disabled ramp for wheelchairs, chairs that cater for a disabled wheelchair, everything that is there to make your journey, whether, like I said, the 90-year-old. And do you know, fun fact, this is actually in Dubai. Do you know if you're a senior citizen here, you get a special card that you can park anywhere in Dubai for free, including in disabled areas, including that kind of stuff. Because we cater for every kind of citizen, not just the old or the disabled or the determined or the blind or anything. And another fun fact is, do you know that pregnant women here get special parking as well? Yeah, and all the malls and all the areas, all the supermarket parking lots, there is always a family parking / disabled parking / pregnant woman parking.
And Doctor, would you say also that there is a possible changing demographic as Dubai evolves and as the GCC evolves? There is now, you could see different types of retirement visas coming on, and there is now
100%.
a new market for improved accessible products within the industry.
100%.
And the developers, I think, are really driving towards this. And there is a point of difference between some of the products that are on the in the market in terms of
Yes.
showing that there is a point of difference for accessible products and actually how that can drive additional footfall and additional revenue to these, these people who are clever enough to take advantage of it.
And the community is amazing as well. So a lot of stuff, you see, like, when you look at TripAdvisor ratings of Dubai, you'll notice something very interesting, actually. You'll see that there's a group for example, American moms in Dubai, expat websites, food connoisseur tours in Dubai that is community-driven. These kind of things that are community-driven are people-driven for the disabled, groups for that, groups for children. I saw, I think it was Oscar or somebody else that shared, no, it was one of my AI companies that we work with. They just did a Halloween kind of party, community-driven, with the kids actually asked for, instead of going from house to house, the kids wanted to meet in a parking lot and go from a trunk to trunk because they were too lazy to go and walk house to house. So they did a trunk Halloween party. It was an amazing car because they love cars, number one. Second, they don't want to walk that long, and then you can do it very quickly. And the weather is nice.
Yeah, and Doctor, would you say that that this universal access, I think maybe we can go to the other doctor maybe, but this universal access drive is also from the government perspective in terms of compliance with different regulations and the introduction of new regulations within the GCC, like the Dubai Universal Access Code and all of these other initiatives which are also driving not just visitor experience but also regulation compliance.
Right. So initially, universal design and accessibility within design was a UN or government regulatory driven requirement. It required the physical built-up space to be accommodating for everyone. But now I'm seeing companies understanding that trying to retrofit a physical environment is, number one, costly, but two, it's time-consuming. And by making sure that accessibility, which is something that you mentioned before, is becoming its own standalone discipline within construction, is not an afterthought, but actually within the fiber and DNA of everything that is built. We're seeing that there's a societal change and a kind of a conceptual understanding that accessibility has to be a part of everything moving forward, not just of the physical space, but of the digital world moving forward as we build our own digital lives.
I'll hand over the mic after this one, but if you think about brands and how brands are recognized internationally as being, accessible and 5-star or however we want to categorize it, we can see that many different, example, hotel chains all have their own branding guidelines, and these are built into the DNAs of the brands. So in the same way that they are actually exceeding the minimum regulation requirements, and they are actually seeking to show that accessibility is actually part of their brand, and that's what's obviously driving the revenue for many of the developers who are, taking advantage of this.
It wouldn't be Dubai if there weren't sponsors. I'm going to go ahead and ask a question to Dr. Uthman. Okay. So, Dr. Uthman, given your role in steering AI towards ethical and responsible use, what's your long-term vision for how AI can contribute more to an inclusive society?
Yeah, because I think in the long term, right, when we mention inclusive society, I think that the reality is when you work in any private corporation, we're commercially driven entities. So I think even the framing of AI ethics really does need to change in my community professional ethicist, that instead of this being like a nice to have, like accessible by design, this is like an absolute commercial necessity for every company to do. Like you don't have a choice, not even just for regulatory compliance reasons, even just to be competitive or to even attract talent in AI. If you're not doing these things, you're not going to, you're going to really struggle over like the next 5 to 10 years, even shorter, even over the next 2 years. My vision for how we'd be doing this at BP and even just more broadly, it's quite simple, right? I think you just need to think through who are the people, who is the actual market, and what do they actually want, right? So even we mentioned the facial recognition stuff, that like if someone's in a wheelchair, how do you actually make sure, very simple check that you can do with any supplier, that can that camera change height? These are very simple fixes that requires a lot of common sense. And AI ethics failures are often the result of unintended consequences.
You introduce yourself.
Oh, that's dangerous. So I'm an architect. I live in Dubai, 28 years now. I'm leading one of the interesting architecture engineering design firms called NOR, N-O-R-R. We've had a pretty good run in the Middle East, and especially Dubai. And of course, this panel sounds really exciting. It's really a hot topic now. Yeah.
I have a question for you, but I'll let you get acclimated to what we're doing first. And so I'm going to go to Anu. Yeah. Anu, if you don't mind, could you please share with us your challenges that you find with companies onboarding the structure of AI for their companies, the organization, collection, and storage of data, and how do you do that ethically?
Absolutely. It's a great question. You know, it's funny. I talk to thousands of companies a year about AI, and it's like teenage kids. Everyone's talking about it. They don't know what it means yet. They're trying to figure out how to get there. And the biggest thing we find with most of our clients, it's getting to AI, you first have to get your data right. And data is barbaric. It is really hard to get your information in the right way to get to outcome. But more importantly, once you do get your information, how do you train a model to be specific and to get real outcome? Uthman was just talking about AI and hiring. And the biggest thing we're finding now, it's what is the right scope of data to bring in to have an ethical response to information. I'm from the States, and we serve a lot of the banks, all the credit data. And a huge conversation that we're having today is how do we use AI to drive credit risk decisions? And how is that not discriminatory in its own right? And then the second question, which is just popped up actually, it's does AI have rights? So not only what is your data, but what is the definition of AI? Is AI a human or humanity, its own consciousness, and does it have rights? And I'm curious, how does this group think about that?
We did the tag thing.
I'll have a go at answering both the questions, right? So the first one's like a hugely relevant one for every organization, because they're like, how can we make our models unbiased? Which is philosophically, it's impossible. You can't, even from the data you select, there's a bias with even the sample you take, right? The whole point is to make an informed decision so you actually know what the unintended impacts could be. So within the US, there's things in legislation like the 4/5 rule, right? Where it's generally, as a rule of thumb, this is like a broad definition, but like 80% of people should be able to benefit from the technology. So at least there's some statistical benchmark, right? So under the hood of an algorithm, there should be whatever data you train on should lead to 80% of people that may be African American versus white American. There shouldn't be a discrepancy that goes beyond that. And again, like technically, there are techniques you can use, things like data cleansing techniques or even selecting appropriate fairness metrics to actually pick which outcome do you want. But for like many organizations, it's a very difficult thing to grapple with, because even when you look at hiring bias, some people might say, you know, why do we need to have more diversity and inclusion in the workplace? I think that we're fine the way it is. Or how do you measure diversity and inclusion? Do you go over protective characteristics like your skin color, hair color, height? Or do you go over things like acquired diversity, like skills, education, life experiences? And for most organizations, right, and I know from personal experiences, you can literally sit here for weeks writing a dissertation thesis in all the ways this could go. But the North Star for every company to make AI ethics practical is, what has your company actually said about things like diversity, accessibility, and inclusion? Like, does your company even have targets for like how many, for example, female engineers you want by 2030 or 2040? Because the value of these North Star metrics means if you use this AI tool or any software, right? If we use this, are we going to hit that metric? And to the point about, often I get asked this, is like, what's the difference between algorithmic bias versus human bias? Because we're all by nature, we're all biased, right? And philosophically, the big difference is the scale of harms and the allocation of harms that can be occurred. So what I mean by that, it's a fancy way of saying, let's say, random example, I'm a manager and I'm biased against green people, for example, right? Let's just say, like a silly example. That's my own prejudice, that's my own bias. Someone else in the company might like green people. So on the whole, human biases can be aggregated to some degree. But if I have an algorithm that is making decisions for tens of thousands of people, maybe even more at once, and that is racially biased or against green people, right? As like this silly example. The amount of people that impacts, it's so vast. So what could be potentially one employment law case against the company has become potentially a class action lawsuit.
Yeah, by the way, I like green people,
Oh, you
in
do?
case everyone's wondering. But I do think there's one part that, you know, as we're all talking about AI, you know, Uthman, I think myself, we're all hitting on this broader point of models. And it's just like human bias in the model, which is what we find is they degrade very quickly. And what does that mean? Right? One of the things we find with many of our clients globally, it's not a set it and forget it. It's not, let me put my AI model out into the wild and let it run free. It will change, and it does change very rapidly. We have many clients where their AI model changes typically over a couple of weeks with just the interactions of their own consumers who are they're interacting with. So that becomes such an important part of how we as leaders think about what is the governance and what does that mean and what are those safeties that we put in. And I'm curious, especially here in Dubai, it's such an amazing
I'll tell you, the best AI book I read so far is not an AI book. It's called Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. The idea is that great author and a great perspective on why we have changed as humans and which directions we're heading towards when we're actually interacting with each other. And it gave one of the examples, it gave many examples, including things like the Friends show and how it changed America and how it changed the world and how we perceive emotion. A friend of mine yesterday, we were at an event and he was telling me we forgot to touch each other, you know, physically when we had COVID. Even the naming of COVID, of social distancing, became such a term that there's nothing social about distancing, right? The idea of us meeting again is so kind of revolutionary and so kind of important that sometimes we forget that gathering together, like getting together, is so important. Like even this physically being in the same place is so important. And we lost that when we had remote work and forgot that. An example that I really want to highlight from the book is they actually used AI to answer and replace a judge when they have a decision for payroll and extension and that kind of stuff. And the AI performed much better in scanning all the history of the prisoner versus a judge. So imagine AI being more accurate than a judge in payroll cases. It's just, when you look at it, there's so much human bias built in everywhere that if you just ignore all that and give it to AI, I can make a more rational decision. I want to tag John Luca.
Hi. Oh,
Welcome, Gianluca.
it's a surprise for me. Okay, well, good afternoon. My name is Gianluca Di Novi. I am a professor at Harvard University, Harvard Medical School, and founder and CEO of a blockchain that is developing new tools for AI. Okay, so I suppose I have to connect to what they were saying. That was the setup. So about biases, you're right, it's totally right. It's not possible to remove biases, but it's extremely important to segment intentions. You can, and you should, if you want to adopt AI in any institutional application, provide, well, first of all, standardize the way you collect data, use data, and you train data, to enforce in case there is the allegation that there is wanted bias in that data set. So, and the reason is not to sue anyone, to pursue anyone, but is to guarantee that there's no intent and there is the willingness to improve at the next iteration the model. Because here we are learning by the day. It's not, the technology, the neural network started at the age of von Neumann. So today we have the computational power to finally extract value from them. But just like human beings have to conform to a society, respect rules, AI has to do exactly the same. Because if you don't do this, people are going to dump liability into AI, are going to blame AI for every mistake because it's the most convenient thing to do, and ruining the reputation of the AI, and vice versa. So you want to make sure that there is a total equilibrium and respect for the framework in which you are operating.
I'm going to jump in, sorry. Dr. Gianluca, I have some questions later about AI and bioengineering and how that can be used to diagnose some disabilities ahead of time and the ethics around that. But Andrew's been sitting in the corner very patiently.
Yeah.
Great. So I'm going to give you a minute to ruminate on that. And I wanted to ask you some questions, okay? First being, in your experience, what are some challenges around key regulatory, around setting key regulations when trying to align cryptocurrencies and current financial or fiat policies?
Well, I'm very glad you asked that question because I was about to jump in to say we haven't actually talked about regulation, legislation, or the law here, which to me, coming from a policy background, seems fundamental. Now, I mean, you're from America, you have credit and data. A lot of people here are from Dubai, you have optimism about the future. I'm European, we have regulation, this is what we do. So for me, this is fundamental for everything. And I think it doesn't necessarily answer, but I think it's one very important part of the puzzle what we've been talking about here in terms of ethics. How do you, as a society, come to some of these answers around where you put a bias? As you say, there's always going to be a bias, but you can have societal safeguards or agreements for where that should sit or where you're comfortable for it to sit. But I think more importantly, regulation also provides the level playing field, the platform for turning a technology into a business. That's what allows you to take an innovation and actually build a business model out of it and bring it to market. It helps with competition, helps with protecting IP, it builds consumer trust, and I think that's trust is the key point here, because legislation, regulation is the agreed way that a society decides what it's going to allow each other to do and how you can interact with each other. Now, we're all used to that, human to human. It doesn't work very well, which is why we have so much regulation, because we don't trust humans very much. So the question might be, is AI more trustworthy than humans, or do we have to replicate it because at the end of the day it's going to be originally programmed by a human? And that then leads on slightly to your question around regulatory frameworks. Like, how's the best way of doing it? And I always think there's two approaches to policy in any sector, really, but particularly a technological one. And that's enabling technology versus protective technology. Regulation towards these technologies. Regulation which opens up the space to enable a technology to be used more widely by consumer citizens, or who gets to access it, who gets to benefit from it, or protective regulation, which says, well, actually, you know what, we're kind of unsure of what this is, but we're going to put in some safeguards for individuals. And I think in the AI space, that's still playing out internationally. It's interesting. So a recent OECD working group was saying that most regulators there don't intend to create new regulation around AI in financial services specifically. So I think there's some idea that maybe, which is quite common, but some idea that you don't need policy or regulation around the technology itself, but around the activities of it, the risks that stem from it. To me, that seems about right. But we're very interested in the rest of the panel's thoughts on this, particularly in the idea that regulation can have the effect of locking in a technological frontier. And so if you say in regulation, you have to do it this way or the bias is here, then actually you can't develop and iterate like you've been talking about.
I'm actually curious, right, from a policy standpoint, which is we've seen regulations around data, but that's fairly lightly regulated. There's GDPR, there's CCPA, there's others, which is more privacy-related sets of data. But when we think about all the trading sets of information out there, what are you seeing in the regulatory world of, are we seeing regulations around what can be trained, what can't, or is it just going to be a Wild West?
It's interesting, right? Because we regulate what society cares about, and de facto you can find out people don't really care about their data because it's not regulated nearly as much as money is regulated. So you've got a sort of implicit answer or explicit answer there. I don't think we're at that stage yet in the regulatory framework. I don't think governments or regulators are really that close to the detail on a lot of what's happening in the technology side of the AI innovation, and therefore they can't regulate it closely. I think what we have seen a lot of is wide AI safety frameworks. And we've certainly seen that across the EU, the UK, the US. And again, it tells you what people care about. They're really worried about risks. It's slightly the sci-fi risk, but I think there's perhaps a challenge here to get from that negative view of AI as something you need to be protected from to another technology that comes with its own challenges and risks that will need to be mitigated.
Okay, so be careful though, because AI is not like a medical device. It is a decision-making technology. And the other thing is that it's a probabilistic technology, which means that it makes mistakes. And you push the AI to the boundary, and when you start getting close to the maximum expertise, you start facing hallucinations. So in terms of regulatory framework, you need two elements. One is the regulation in place, which is a guideline. And the other thing are the tools to be enforced when there is a problem. Just like when in medical device, for medical devices or drug, there is a protocol that you need to follow. And unlike to other industries, if you don't follow the protocol from the beginning till the end, you're never going to get on the market. When it comes to AI, there are two possible options. They will put in place a framework immediately, and probably they will improve with time, or they will not. Someone is going to get hurt, and then they will anyway. It's inevitable. It's you use that tool, and again, I was saying already before, you can dump into that tool a lot of liability to justify actions that you don't want to take as a human being, and you say, oh, that was the best solution recommended by this tool, and that is something that you need to be very careful about.
I'll jump in.
All right, everyone's got something to say.
Can I say
Even the
something?
audience.
So,
I think we got a question.
you have a question?
I'm listening to the conversation. I'm listening to the conversation, and I was wondering whether we could push it a bit further, because a lot of the discussion relates to risk areas and regulation. But if we really think about risk, surely the biggest risk are bad actors. And we're not talking about that. But ultimately, isn't that where the dark side of what could be possible, bearing in mind scale, distribution, networks, and capacity to influence are? And therefore, what's your view on what needs to be put in place proactively to prevent some reasonably credible high-risk scenarios that bad actors can much more easily make come true now that this technology is emerging?
Am I okay to?
Well, why don't you go first, yeah?
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant question, right? So by nature, by definition, bad actors will often not obey the law, right? Even if you have the best regulatory framework there, they'll find ways to skirt around it or just not comply. I think a great example of this is just deepfakes. I think the rise of synthetic media poses all sorts of challenges to people regardless of what industry you're in. And a really unique challenge we're going to face is things like investigative journalism and whistleblowers, right? That if, for example, you have someone that could be the next Edward Snowden type character, where people are able to make deepfakes of this person or say the evidence you provided could have been fabricated with AI, we're moving the burden of proof in terms of this investigation. And even for most companies that have whistleblowing hotlines, these sorts of things are going to be disrupted both internally and externally. And that's why a lot of big tech companies are producing some standards around authenticity and the ways you can use things like blockchain, right, for even authentication or even digital watermarking. But I think there is like the big psychological aspect of just because something has like a digital watermarking on it, is that enough to convince the average person that it's still authentic? So I think that it's a great question, but I think one of the best developments that we've had recently is the rise of these AI safety institutes, and a lot of them are tasked with actually looking at the future crime scenarios we're going to face and think through with like multimodal Gen AI applications where AI almost like sunglasses, which could be great to be like, look, analyze a whole room. A bad actor could say, how can I break into this room, right? Or how can I steal something from here? So I think the AI safety institutes and actually exploring this actively in R&D is incredibly important.
Yeah, a quick follow-up to that. Who's to judge who the bad actors are in these scenarios? Because if we just take from what has happened within OpenAI, the two board members that were opposed to what Sam had found were replaced by two board members from the Bilderberg Group. So who's to judge who are the good actors and who are the bad actors in these scenarios?
As a follow-up to that, I think that in terms of like the corporate governance of OpenAI, I think that as a company, they can decide who needs to be on the board. But again, like as a consumer or customer, you can make decisions over whether this is your LLM of choice moving forward, right? But when I'm thinking about actors, I'm thinking of actual people that are going to be engaging in future crime scenarios or even the future of crime as a service that actively engage in a criminal enterprise. But again, like in insider threats and corporate espionage, we might see even like murkier gray lines around this area.
Regarding technologies that can be enforced, when I was saying there is the framework, the regulation, and there are the tools. You mentioned the blockchain, which is what I built. I built essentially those kind of tools. It's not about identifying, it's about tracing. I give you a way to reconduct the final outcome to who originated the topic. So let's say that there is a deep fake. If I created the right tools to have access to a certain type of AI, you can track where the original information came from. I'm not saying that everyone is going to do. Someone is just going to see the watermark and say, okay, I'm good with it. But if, when someone questions, there is a trail decentralized, which means it's not in the hands of one company, two companies, but is a decentralized community, can trace reliably, can audit that information back. And then you can determine if it was a bad actor or not. It's common sense at that point.
I'll add to that real quick. First of all, crime as a service, that sounds like an awesome venture play, if anyone out here is looking for that. Back to the, we're talking about third-party actors, we're talking about bad actors, good actors. What's the intent? Let's remove the AI moment here for a second, and let's just take basic data analytics. You guys have, I think everyone in this room has seen psycholinguistics in action, which is taking your social data post and understanding what your human psychology is and what your intent is. That's fantastic when we use it in advertising today. I get a great offer that I want to have. I've given my data for free to the social networks to get this. And in return, I get an amazing offer. I can buy what I want. I get the service offer I want. The flip side is, we talked about deep fakes. We also talked about, we're seeing it in elections around the world now, where we can move human intent by the language we use, and the language is a algorithm, right? It doesn't matter what culture or where we're at. So I think the real question, and we can get back to traceability and understanding who the bad actor is. I think part of this is, we talked about regulation here a moment ago. Is there a set of information that should be regulated? Is there a different economic model that drives the outcome? I'm in the data business. I do this monetization and helping folks all around the world bring their data to bear. And what I would say, it's this train has left the station. When I was at IBM, ran Watson, and this was, over 10 years ago. We worked with a European railway company, I guess that's the right way to say it, but they started monetizing data over 10 years ago. So if a European railway is monetizing data, everyone's going to do it, and that means we're going to have all sorts of other implications. So I think it comes back to how do we think about data, the governance, the privacy of it. Otherwise, it's going to get out of hand.
Loving this discussion. So as a European, I also like regulations and rules, and of course all the good actors will comply to, as they always do. The problem is the bad actors, because by default they don't comply to any rules and regulations. So what do we do about these? How do we control them? And I have no answers, but I would like your view on it.
I'm going to jump in there.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give a specific example related to our topic, which is accessibility. And that example would be eugenics. Eugenics is a study on changing a population based on desirable phenotypes and genotypes. Right now, there is a conversation being had in the medical world, which is a conversation I wanted to bring up with you, surrounding disabilities on if we can use AI to identify certain genetic markers that will eliminate and eradicate the existence of certain disabilities. Not only, the argument is this might be better for the human race to stop the perpetuation of these diseases, but then there's also a flip side to that coin. Are we removing the humanity that exists in the complexity of diversity? So in your opinion, and also for the Europeans who like regulatory, where would we draw the line when it comes to disability and bioengineering as it relates to AI?
I mean, I really don't have a thought on the ethics of this, other than to be, well, very alarmed by the scenario you put out, right? So I don't have an answer to that. All I can say is, I mean, kind of going back to my previous point, which is, this is what politics exists for. These are difficult questions. I don't know that anyone necessarily has the right answer, but as societies, we have to come together to it. I think perhaps it's slightly different in the tech space, but I come mainly from the blockchain space, and there's a deep distrust of the state in all its forms. And I think that's very unhelpful, because actually the people grappling these questions on the technological side, on the business side, and the regulatory side do need to have a very difficult conversation, and the prerequisite for that is to actually trust each other. Now, I'm old-fashioned enough to believe in the sort of traditional approach to engaging society and the state, which is through the usual institutions that exist. A lot of people don't. I don't know what that means if the only way you can engage between the regulators or the state and the individual is through shouting at each other on Twitter.
It may become as a consequence of challenge between the market demand and the regulation. So this is something that's probably more from a universal standpoint, but obviously you will have a market demand and then you will have regulation, and sometimes the market will be in front and sometimes the regulation will be in front. So it's about balancing that market demand versus regulation and trying to meet a point in the middle somehow.
I'll just suggest something. 2 minutes, if you allow me. You want to say something, Oscar? Okay. So the idea. A while ago, in the 1990s, the internet came out. So we had internet superhighway. So it became network information became available and to network to everywhere. So freedom and democratization of information. Then later than that, social network became a part because we became network social beings, basically. And this is a powerful idea. So social beings on the network. Soon after that, we've seen the Arab Spring, we've seen a lot of other things that became network communities and network-based organizations as well. You can have a company that's based everywhere around the world. The thing that enables network-centric organizations is not only the doctrinalization of the idea, and people are agreeing around a certain idea and goal, but in the same company. Soon after that, money came into that. So we went from network-centric organizations to network-centric hydra organization where there is no leader. So not decentralized, but distributed networks. Completely decentralized, not federated, completely autonomous, decentralized organizations. Soon after that, monetary value came in through cryptocurrency and digital payment and things like that. Then we saw another shift, which is DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, where autonomy equals pseudo-anonymity as well. So nobody knows who these guys are. As long as they deliver on the value, they get paid. You can have anonymous voting, anonymous payments, anonymous everything. And now we're seeing the fifth phase of that, which is autonomous bots with money, autonomous agents. And you can release those in the wild because they are released on the network, they have the money, they can interact with smart contracts, they can interact with the organization, pay and get paid, and do trades completely fully autonomous. I was just sitting with another colleague of mine, and we were discussing a guy that got paid a certain amount of money, and within a few months, he created a bot that went and spent that money and doubled, tripled, it's completely unguarded, completely unconstrained, and made so much money on its own, trading the market, doing DeFi things, based on a very self-learning kind of script, and it made a lot of money without any human supervision. It's a scary idea, but this is where not 5 years, 10 years from now that's happening, that's already happening right now. What's the next phase? Only God knows.
I want to bring in Yahya here and bring the discussion back to accessibility. And Yahya is a very famous architect behind the world's tallest hotel, Seal Tower. It's going to be one of the landmarks here when it is completed. I want to hear from you and how you're talking about data and what we were saying about the knowledge about the demographics and how it impacts the design. Just give us your spiel on AI and your work.
So it's on. Yeah. You know, we have a studio here. All our design work, we specialize in super tall buildings. That's what we design, and we are a tech firm. Do the engineering and the architecture. For the last 18 months, we've been grappling with how we can bring AI into our design studio. You know, how do we use it as a tool? And we've had mixed success. We call it taming the dragon. You know, so there's this tremendous, powerful tool, and we're trying to figure out how we can harness this fire-breathing dragon to actually deliver for us at a tactical material level solutions that we want. It's starting to work now. It didn't work for the first year. It was difficult. But now we are seeing, of course, the asymptote. It's going crazy. So what is AI doing for us? It can design for us. So when I remember 2016 when that famous Go championship in Seoul, Korea, when DeepMind beat the Go champion in 2016, and we all thought, okay, what does this mean? It wasn't so much about data. It was about simulated neural connections. You know, so AI is simulating how the neural network works. You know, binaries. For us, that's very exciting. So I'm going to put a positive twist on the downside and the risk. In the world of creative engineering and architecture, AI is going to be revolutionary, and I believe in a very positive way. So we're going to be able to produce designs that I cannot imagine, and they'll be better. They'll be better than the stuff we've done, because it will iterate faster. It will find solutions that we would not have thought about. So we are starting to see really crazy solutions, but they're not crazy as in psychotic. They're better. They're unusually amazing creative solutions. And my concern is a bit different than you guys. My concern is, what will I do with my people? So I've got 125 people in our studio in Festival City. They come from 20 nations. And if this goes on, within 3 to 5 years, our studio could be 20 people, not 120. And we could be producing 5 times the work we're doing now with 1/5 the number of people. And what does that mean for society? And what purpose will we have? So I stay up nights worrying about that more than regulation, personally, just to give a different perspective on things. There's the social impact of AI productivity. It's phenomenal. And we're going to have to make decisions. We're going to have to decide whether we're going to hire or we're going to fire. And I hate it, because we've invested in our people.
Do you not think this is now having the AI to do the design work? Do you feel it's now bringing on a renaissance of new artistic capability?
Correct.
I'm curious from your standpoint and your business.
I think we're going to see, we're seeing it in the sciences, and I think we're going to see it in everywhere. We're going to see it in the arts, and we're going to see it in, so I work at the intersection of science and art. So we're artistic, but our buildings have to stand up. So we have to do both science and art. And AI is having a fantastic effect on our work. But I'm worried. I'm worried about us. What does it mean for society?
It seems like we have a new team member on the Avengers. Before I allow you to introduce yourself, the gentleman in the purple tie has been asking a question for a moment.
Yeah, so I think two questions. One a little bit longer back, and then I think for the last one in terms of productivity increase and what are we doing with people, right? I think on the first question, so there were a couple of comments related to data quality, data availability, discrimination based on probability model, and then basically understanding what that we are actually only AI now used as a probabilistic model in order to create deterministic decisions, right? Now, I think the first question which I have, how much is that actually, that paradigm is changing through large language model, where they are actually helping to analyze data or basically create better data quality by restructuring unstructured data into structure and identifying metadata.
Yes.
Second, basically with the language model that we are now moving from not just a probabilistic decision-making model, but actually a new programming language, which basically translate previous decisions, which we try to simplify through data sets by saying this is input to output, to actually reflecting what the decision mechanism needs to be in a descriptive way. And we are utilizing the statistic model rather to identify truths than to make decisions based on that, right?
Yeah.
Which basically then counterfights the arguments around that the model itself is discriminating, but that we are setting a rule which is basically less. I'm not saying that is without any problem, but we will have different kinds of problems, right? And then I think to the last point, maybe just as an angle, I think the same what you basically discussed before, I would assume basically people ask the same questions for accountants when this first computer was introduced, who basically were calculating manually, right? And they had hundreds of people, right? So I think it's a question of what are the new skill sets we need to train ourselves as well as our children to basically deal with the new reality. And I think it's not replacing humans, it's just a new ways of productivity, and we actually need to accept that what is the skill sets which we need now, which is not executing, but actually asking the right questions and imagine what we actually want to get out of the tool, and in order to guide that, right? Because that's, whenever you're basically using that, you will get a suggestion, but it might not be the best suggestion. So it's up to you and your capabilities to decide what is actually the best suggestion and wants to optimize against it. So.
Yeah, so if the panel's fine, I'd like to take the first one at least. You would first one, so I'll take a few of them, fine. So having been both a consultant, Rand Watson, have the company we have, the first problem, which is how do I use LLMs to automate both data integration, but I think it's a broader statement you're asking, which is not just automate data integration, data quality, data governance, which is the who, the where, the lineage. I'd like to say that I think our company is probably one of the first is doing this at massive scale. The first thing I'd say is this. LLMs by themselves are not a panacea. It's a panacea to a lot of pain and destruction and loss of value, frankly. What we found is this. We are using it to automate a lot of development jobs. And we do it because when we looked across the globe, we saw many companies would hire thousands of people to move data. And I'm pretty sure most people, that's not what they want their job to be, to moving data from point A to point B. What we did find is when we started to use LLMs to do this, it was actually really horrible at it. And so we took a different approach, which was saying we had to teach an LLM just the same way we teach a developer. And so we as a company did a joint venture with the Georgia Tech and one of the IITs. And we basically spent time putting a model together, almost think of it as a curriculum, a PhD in data integration and data movement. What we found very quickly was we were then able to, does it do it automatically? Automatically, no. But what it allowed us to do was remove the context of having to be a great coder, whether that's Spark, SQL, you name your language, and move it to the natural language of that person. What that also helped us to do was to enable us to do data management and migration much more globally, right? So if you think about it, most of the folks I had were either India or US based. Now we have programs around the world. They can do it in their natural language, take the governance, bring it. So that's number one. I think number two, it's to your second part of the question, we believe, and actually I'll take a step back. So there's two perspectives we have. It's number one, it's cloud was interesting because cloud was the decoupling of hardware from software. There's a big belief, and I have a very big belief, that data in AI is the decoupling of data from software. And if you believe that, data becomes everywhere, it becomes ubiquitous, but it's now in multiple ways. And so what LLMs bring us is a new way of programming. Right? I don't think programming goes away, but it assists us in removing some of the complexity out there. And that's what we're starting to see, but there's still a huge amount of training, a huge amount of governance that goes on. And I'm curious, I know there's a lot of folks here working in this space. Are you guys seeing the same thing?
Yeah, I think that to echo your point, right? Like we're seeing like a lot of the things that you said, but I think something that was raised was the broader job displacement question, which I think is the huge elephant in the room for everyone, right? It's like, what is the future of work going to be? And I go back, there's one really fascinating conversation I had with a professor from MIT. I think she's probably one of the most insightful people I've ever had the pleasure of speaking to, right? And she told me something I'll never forget. She says, we so often ask like what machines can do for us and what AI can do for us. Why don't you just stop and ask what machines or AI cannot do? What can't these things do? Then when we narrowed it down, you're like, can't tell the truth, can't tell basically, honesty, courage, integrity, human characteristics, which are like Aristotelian virtue ethics, essentially. And that's the future of work, is these very human skills that are often interpreted as being softer skills now that might need to be hardwired into people to go, that is the future of work. It's going to be, and this is my personal view with no empirical evidence to back this up, right, is that I think the future of work is going to be each of us working as composers, but you have basically like a symphony of several algorithms that you're essentially line managing. You might be one person who's the human in this new convoluted loop with several machines talking to each other, but it's that person that's creative enough to be able to basically use several machines that might be autonomous agents simultaneously. Again, no empirical evidence to back that up, but that's where my gut feeling is where this could go.
I'll give you some empirical evidence. My team took all my old text and trained an AI model for me to help answer text. I used it on my wife. It was not very human. And
there you go. Citation.
I am still in the doghouse. So I think the human touch is really needed.
I don't think that was what Dr. Rosalind was thinking of, which is like the humane use cases. But yeah, citation. There you go.
There you go.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a quick question. I mean, I think that technology in general can be disruptive, but do you guys draw a line between machine learning and AI? Because sometimes they're used synonymously, sometimes they're two different things. So do you feel as though there's a difference between the two, or is there technically a difference between the two?
I think the word AI is the most overused word right now to describe anything that deals with data. And I loved the nuance you said between machine learning and AI. What I find when I talk to most of our clients around the world, it's AI means, can I get data in Excel? Can I get it in a report? That's AI. So today it's way overused, and I would say the majority of folks outside of this room don't have a real understanding of what it means from a reasoning standpoint.
Yeah, I was going to actually just echo your point completely. I think that like if you just boil it down to like what is AI really, it's software that's automating predictions for the most part. But I think like a lot of people, again, because there's so much hype around the technology, you'll often get people oversell things and say it's AI powered, but when you look under the hood, there's no actual AI underneath this at all. Or even in my space with like AI governance, right? Teams are offering these new tools that arguably they suppose that it can do your bias and fairness testing and tell you which thresholds and which regulation to be complying with, and it does it all. Then you realize it's just hooked up to like IBM Fairness 360, and they just put like a new wrapper around it for a tool that you can get basically for free.
To your point, in academia, we're using machine learning to provide personalized learning experiences for students. That's a game changer for educators who are working with students directly. It's much faster to recognize skill deficit in students, and we noticed that the tests that are using or piloting machine learning are adapting skill sets. So for example, if a student has difficulty answering questions at a certain level, it will like modify just a little bit and provide a question that's a little bit easier for the student to answer, to play on, like you said, what AI can't do, provide intrinsic goals and intrinsic rewards for the student to then use that confidence boost to answer the next question that it will level up. So I believe in education there's a whole new beautiful front for AI. We are enthusiastic, but again, when we bring the conversation back to accessibility and data sets, AI is extremely data hungry, and for protected classes of people, it's hard to gather enough information without the right protocols. So back in the day, a million years ago, there was something called the Belmont Report. And if there's any researchers in the room, we understand that that was the report that came out after World War II that ensured human rights when it comes to research. The opportunity to opt out of a research study, what are the parameters around human participation. And we don't have something like that yet. And when we're working with learners, people of determination, the aged population, and I work with people who have cognitive deficits, not just learners, and individuals with memory deficits are extremely vulnerable when it comes to what are original ideas, right? And if a machine is adapting to data that's being put in, then it will also adapt to the information that it puts out and it receives from the organic human being.
Johan, you have been waiting to say something.
Is this on? No. There you go. I think it's on, right? Yeah, I feel like the seat filler at the Oscars just jumped in here. My name is Johan, and I'm the head of business development for AFRY. We're an engineering service provider. I have 20,000 colleagues, about 1,000 in architecture and design and industrial design. And I just wanted to share my experience of using AI in the process. We're very pragmatic when it comes to these tools, and we just want to optimize and speed up the speed of product development or planning or designing. And we are not taking the humans out of the equation. We just use it to explore, get more ideas, and as you said, these unexpected designs that we couldn't think of ourselves. But we still keep the humans as gatekeepers in the whole process, and it has benefited us in our projects. So I'm very happy that we actually did this. So you should not be too worried. That was my comment to your take on it. Sorry for disturbing this great panel.